What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I'm attorney Eric Scramlin, and this is the Tactical In-Service Podcast, a podcast for law enforcement where I break down training topics in case law to help you stay up on the law. Tonight's episode, I'm going to be talking about recently signed by the governor into law, New Mexico House Bill 4, otherwise known as the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. I want to spend a little bit of time breaking this thing down and explaining what you need to know as a New Mexico police officer about House Bill 4. Before we get started, if this is your first time checking out the podcast, be sure to hit that subscribe button down there. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a follow. If you're listening to the podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, whatever you use to listen to podcasts, it's probably there. So make sure you give us a follow there. On this channel and this podcast, I break down the case law and the new laws that comes out to help you, the law enforcement community, stay up on the law. Okay, New Mexico House Bill 4, otherwise known as the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. I've been getting a ton of questions on this. As of recording this episode, the governor recently signed this into law just a couple days ago. So I've had an opportunity now to go through in detail the final signed version of the law and kind of look at it and compare it to the existing law that's out there. So I'm going to try to break that down tonight, as usual, keep these episodes under 15 minutes. So, I'm going to do my best to break it down for you in that time slot. So by far the most common question I'm getting on this so far is qualified immunity. It's been taken away by this statute, by this law. So what does that mean for me as the police officer? Well, I'm going to try to answer that for you tonight. And by the way, I apologize if you're hearing the revving of engines up in the background. Just so happens that I happen to live across the street from the Hobbs Speedway, and it's Friday night, race night, so you may hear some engines fire up there in the background. But hey, you may like that sort of thing. So I apologize if it gets too loud. I'll try to do my best to edit it out. Not sure if you guys are picking up on that or not. But okay, in order for me to answer the question about how does House Bill 4, how is this going to apply to you, the law enforcement community here in New Mexico, I got to spend a few minutes and talk about the existing case law that we have, the existing statutes that we have as the case is right now as it relates to police officer liability. So, of course, you may or may not know, hopefully you do know, but let's talk about Section 1983, which is that's what House Bill 4 is kind of designed to emulate, but make it applicable under New Mexico's own constitution. So let's spend a few minutes here talking about Section 1983 liability. All police officers in New Mexico and anywhere else in the country, for that matter, are subject to liability under Section 1983. Okay, so what is Section 1983? This is a federal statute, so we're talking about federal law here, and I'm paraphrasing this. It allows a person to sue a police officer, or potentially, and I say potentially, it's going to be important when I talk about House Bill 4 because it's much broader than 1983. It allows people to sue a police officer or their municipal or state employer, potentially, for violations of civil rights. More or less, we're talking about constitutional violations under the Bill of Rights, for example, the Fourth Amendment. And when that person who commits that violation is acting under color of law. Again, this is important because it's a little bit more broad under House Bill 4. So what that essentially amounts to is that a person can sue the government under Section 9, can sue the government or a police officer under 1983, under a 1983 theory, if the person who committed the violation against them was acting under color of law, meaning they were a police officer, usually. And they can also sue the police officer's employer, like the municipality, the county, the state, if they can prove what's known as Monell liability, which is a theory of how you attach the municipal or the government employer to the lawsuit. Again, I'm paraphrasing here, but if they can show a pattern, for example, officer so-and-so violated my client's Fourth Amendment rights, and this department that hired this officer has a history and a pattern of this type of Fourth Amendment, of these Fourth Amendment violations, and that allows the plaintiff to then attach the municipal employer, and that's generally where the money is at. So they often try to do that. That's kind of the goal. Again, that's important because House Bill 4 has a little bit different version of who gets sued and how their employer gets sued, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so going on here with 1983. The remedies for 1983 violation is money damages. We're talking about civil law here. It's not criminal. You're not being prosecuted under Section 1983. You're being sued civilly in federal court. So oftentimes, the exclusive remedies are monetary damages and or declaratory relief. What's an example of declaratory relief? Well, take a look at some of these cities across the country that have been subject to repeated 1983 lawsuits. They're under what's known as a consent decree, where the Department of Justice will come in and take over that department. It can be very, very expensive for the department, and they do come in and take over, and they change policies and that sort of thing. And we've seen that in various cities across the country. So it's not good for the people of the community because it results in higher taxes and a number of other things that I'm not going to have time to go into in this podcast. But I just want you to understand those are the remedies. Okay, what are the defenses to a 1983 claim? Well, generally speaking, what we're going to try to do, first of all, is we're going to show there was no constitutional violation if the plaintiff's alleging that you violated, for example, their Fourth Amendment rights when you entered their house without a warrant. We go in and we try to show that there was no constitutional violation, that in fact you did not violate the constitutional right. But then that leads us to what's the big defense that you guys are concerned with individually as a police officer, and that is qualified immunity. Again, I don't have time to go into an entire discussion about qualified immunity. I'm probably going to do that on one of my next episodes, so stay tuned, hit that subscribe button. I'll break it down a little bit further. But the Reader's Digest version of qualified immunity is essentially that a police officer will be dismissed from the lawsuit even if they violated a constitutional right, if we can show that the officer did not violate a clearly established law and did not act with malicious intent. As the courts have stated, it's designed to protect all but the plainly incompetent and those who knowingly violate the law. At this point in time, the current makeup of our United States Supreme Court has made it pretty clear that they're not going to abolish the doctrine of qualified immunity, that they're going to leave that to the legislator. That doesn't mean that the House and the Senate couldn't pass a bill that abolished it, but at this point in time, we're not there. So as it sits at the time of recording this, qualified immunity is still a defense in federal court. Okay, now now that we got that background, let's switch gears. Let's talk about House Bill 4. So the first thing I notice when I read House Bill 4 is who does it apply to? Okay, and remember, what they try to do is emulate Section 1983, but let's do it under state law, under New Mexico's own constitution. So the first thing I notice about it is who does it apply to? Okay, and they say it applies to a public body, and they specifically define. They define a public body in the bill as a public body means a state or local government, an advisory board, a commission, an agency, or an entity created by the Constitution of New Mexico or any branch of government that receives public funding, including political subdivisions, special tax districts, school districts, and institutions of higher education, but not including ASECIAs and other water associations. So it's very broad. Very broad. Remember, 1983 applies to someone acting under color of law, and you only get to sue the municipality if you can prove Monell liability. So this is incredibly broad. But what's important for you to know as a police officer is in the bill, it says the exclusive person or the exclusive entity that can be sued is the public body. So what that means for you is you cannot be sued as plaintiff versus Officer Smith. Officer so-and-so. They have to sue your employer. So you will never be named under this bill by your name. However, you're probably still going to have to explain it because you're going to be associated with it. But that's something important to know. The bill also provides and requires that your municipality indemnify you, which means they have to provide for your defense, provide an attorney for you, and they have to pay for it. So that's important to know that. So again, that's a main difference there is how they define public body. So it's much broader, but important for you to know that you won't be named individually. It's going to be your employer that's named in that. The next thing that I know you guys have been asking me about is what about qualified immunity? Well, HB 4 specifically has a section that abolishes the defense of qualified immunity. cannot be used, cannot be brought up. So that means your defense is going to be limited to, was there a constitutional violation? And remember, this is going to lead to my next point. Is there a constitutional violation under New Mexico's Constitution? We're not talking about federal law here like we are in Section 1983 with House Bill 4. It's, did you violate their constitutional rights under New Mexico's Constitution? Why is that important for you? This is incredibly important, and this is the main thing that you need to understand about this bill, is we're talking about New Mexico specific law. And as you guys should know, as police officers in New Mexico applies what's known as the interstitial approach. That means our courts have determined that defendants, that people in New Mexico are afforded, and they say, far greater rights than the federal counterpart. You guys see this all the time in areas such as pretextual stops, expanding the scope of a traffic stop, the Carroll Doctrine. These are all things that are applied much stricter under New Mexico's Constitution, and far more rights are given to citizens under New Mexico's Constitution than federal law. So why is that important? That means if you go to a training out of state, or you bring in, a company that does training, they talk about Fourth Amendment law, that might not necessarily apply to you. If they're talking about the Carroll Doctrine and things that you can do under the automobile exception, you could still be violating New Mexico's Constitution. If you do a pretextual stop, court finds that you did a pretextual stop in a suppression hearing, that's going to subject you to liability under House Bill 4, where it wouldn't under a Section 1983 claim, more or less. So very important that you understand New Mexico specific case law in New Mexico's own constitution. I can't stress that point enough. If you take nothing else from this, make sure that you understand the differences here, that you're going to have to, make it your job now to go out and read New Mexico case law and stay up on that. If you're looking for more information on the interstitial approach, you don't quite understand, that New Mexico is different, that they provide more rights, but you don't quite understand why. I'm going to leave a link here. If you're watching the YouTube channel, I'm going to try to slide it up here. There'll be a link in the description below. I did a video on explaining what the interstitial approach is. So I'll link to that, pause this, go check it out, or watch that when you're done here. If you're listening to the podcast on, your Apple Podcasts or whatever you use to listen to it, I'll leave a link in the description below, or jump over to the YouTube channel, Tactical Attorney, and you can check out the video there where I go into a lot more detail explaining exactly what the interstitial approach is. So make sure you take some time to understand that. And the other thing I want to mention about House Bill 4, if you've been to any of my classes, my training, if you've worked with me in the past, my attitude is, if you've noticed in this podcast, I'm a strong advocate for law enforcement, been a prosecutor my whole career. I'm not on here complaining about it, giving my opinion, and I have some opinions about this bill, but that's not what this podcast is about. I've always taken the attitude, in what I share in my courses is, it doesn't matter. You need to understand the law. We don't try to get around the law or find loopholes. What I try to teach you is to know everything you can about the law, so you are the most prepared that you can be, and then use it to your advantage. So it's incumbent upon you now not to complain or whine about this. You're going to have to go out, you're going to have to understand it, and you're going to have to buff up on your New Mexico case law, because it is the law. The governor signed it, and you're going to have to make it your job to understand it. And if you are out there following the law, if you know New Mexico case law, then you don't have to worry about this stuff. You don't have to worry about qualified immunity, because if you don't violate someone's constitutional rights, then we don't get to the doctrine of qualified immunity. So very important. That's the big takeaway I'd like you to take from this, is that you need to buff up, make sure you're understanding New Mexico specific case law. So let's wrap this up and let's talk about the key takeaways here. So remember, if you're being sued under a theory of Section 1983 liability, you're going to be sued in federal court under federal law, federal constitution, which in qualified immunity is still going to apply there. Nothing has changed with that. You can also now be sued under House Bill 4, the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, in New Mexico state courts. This isn't going to be in federal court. This is going to be in state court. And the key thing is, you're going to be sued under New Mexico's own constitution, which our courts give far greater rights. So you need to make sure you understand the interstitial approach. You need to make sure you understand New Mexico specific case law. Remember, you will not be named personally in the lawsuit. It won't be plaintiff versus defendant officer. It'll be plaintiff versus city of whoever your employer is or state of New Mexico. The defense of qualified immunity does not apply. So what that means for you is the defense is going to be that you did not violate someone's constitutional rights. So again, I can't stress this enough. You have to be familiar with New Mexico specific case law because qualified immunity is not a defense that's going to apply. So make sure that you make it your job to be very professional, stay up to date on this stuff. We don't try to get around the law. We are going to understand the law, and we are going to master that and be true professionals. If you have any questions for me, please feel to leave them in the comments down there below. Go to my website, tacticalattorney.com. Just so happens I have a full course on New Mexico search and seizure. I'd be happy to talk to you about what I can do for you or your department to get you guys buffed up on New Mexico specific case law. Remember, every battle is won before it's fought. Stay safe. I will see you guys next time.